The SEC is moving to 9 conference games, finally. And as my friend Mike Golick Jr. said, now what the hell is everybody going to complain about? Well, the answer is Notre Dame being in a conference. But for this particular argument, it's over now. All of those years of the Big Ten and the Big 12 complaining that the SEC only played 8 conference games in 2026, it's over. The SEC will play 9. 3 fixed opponents that every team will play annually. The other 12 opponents will rotate through twice every 4 years. So if you join an SEC team and you play 4 years, you're going to get to see every other team in the SEC. This has actually been one of the sticking points. So here's the thing. There's a popular notion out there that the SEC was really resistant to this and none of the schools wanted to do this. Actually, half to more than half of the schools have wanted to do this for a long time. In fact, Texas A&M proposed it in 2019. But the argument kept evolving because the reasons kept changing. Money got involved. Then politics got involved in terms of the college football playoff and what the Big Ten wanted and when they wanted to trade this for this. And it became a big bargaining chip. And now it becomes a very interesting situation because the Big Ten has said, hey, we might back off our desire for a 16-team playoff with 4 auto bids for the Big Ten, 4 for the SEC, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12. If the SEC would go to 9 conference games, we might be willing to consider what the SEC wants, which is 5 conference champions get automatic bids, and then there's 11 at-large bids, which, by the way, that is what all the other FBS conferences want. It's not just the SEC. The Big Ten has said, maybe we'll think about that if the SEC plays 9 conference games. So the SEC is playing 9 conference games. Ball is in the Big Ten's court. One little addendum that the SEC tacked on to this thing when they approved it. Every team, in addition to playing the 9 conference games, must schedule 1 quality opponent, quality being a term that I guess they're going to define themselves, but from the ACC, the Big 12, or the Big 10. And I think what this is Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and South Carolina, which have annual out-of-conference rivals that they must play every year. Like the Florida State game, the South Carolina-Clemson game, Georgia Tech, Kentucky-Louisville, those games aren't going anywhere. You can't drop one of those because you now have to schedule an extra conference game. So what the SEC is telling the other 12 schools is you got to do this too. Now, for some schools, that's not going to be a problem. Tennessee has usually scheduled a game like this. Oklahoma, Texas frequently schedule games like this. If I'm Oklahoma, I might be calling Oklahoma State and being like, let's do Bedlam, guys. Bedlam would qualify here. But we'll see what they all do with it, but they do have to do that. And by the way, this makes what Indiana did to its schedule look even worse. If you don't remember, Indiana has cleared the decks of inequality in its non-conference schedule and just scheduled slop for the next few years. We'll see if they revisit that now because Kurt Cignetti, their coach, said they were embracing the SEC model. Well, the SEC schedules are going to be significantly tougher than Indiana's schedule going forward. But the big question is what this means for the college football playoff. They're doing it now. They're approving it now in time to give them a chance to approve a new format for 2026 for the college football playoff. They all want a 16-team one. I would prefer it stay at 12. I think a lot of you would prefer it stay at 12. I don't think that's going to happen. I think now this is sort of cleared the way, and this allows them to have apples-to-apple schedule comparisons. It sounds like the ACC is going to do it too, which is really interesting because, remember, the ACC has the deal where 5 of its schools have to play Notre Dame every year because of a scheduling agreement that's part of Notre Dame's conference affiliation agreement because they're in the ACC and the other sports. So 5 of their schools were already basically playing a 9-game conference schedule. So what they do is probably mirror the SEC's rule where it says you've got to schedule 1 quality non-conference, which Notre Dame certainly counts for that. So those 5 schools will be covered by the Notre Dame game. Plus, Notre Dame's already signed an annual game with Clemson. So we'll see if that counts for Clemson, but they've already got South Carolina. So that's the thing. You look at this, schedules are going to get better across the board. And what this will force, like I said about Indiana, it's going to force other teams in other leagues to level up their schedules as well. Remember, Nebraska just dropped a series with Tennessee. That looks really bad now. The Big Ten probably going to schedule more games against the SEC. We've got a bunch of Big Ten SEC games coming up this year. You got Texas opening at Ohio State. That was scheduled before Texas went to the SEC. You got Michigan going to Oklahoma. That was scheduled before Oklahoma went to the SEC, but it is an SEC Big Ten matchup now. I think we're going to get more of that, and I'm excited about that. That's going to be a lot of fun. So we'll go do a little history lesson here to explain why this happened and why this was probably always going to happen. Remember, I mentioned this was actually proposed back in 2019 by Texas A&M because the schedules had gotten really stale in the SEC. When the SEC was a 14-team league with 2 divisions, they worked so hard to protect the Auburn-Georgia game and the Alabama-Tennessee rivalry that it made the schedules really boring. You basically had one rotating spot in your schedule. So if you were an East team, you had one West team that you played every year. So if you're Florida, you saw LSU every year. If you're Georgia, you saw Auburn every year. But you barely ever saw anybody else. So if you're Georgia, you didn't see Alabama that much. If you were Florida, you didn't get to see Auburn that much, even though you used to play annually. And they were getting sick of it because it was getting harder and harder to sell tickets. So what they wanted to do was add the 9th conference game at that point so that they could sell more tickets and sell season tickets more easily and have more variety from the SEC come through the stadium. They didn't get it approved. Pandemic happens. Everything else happens. The SEC takes that CBS best game of the week package and sells it to ESPN for $300 million a year. They did that during the pandemic, even though it didn't start until last year. That's part of this too. So put a pin in that one. So we find out in 2022 that Texas and Oklahoma are coming into the league. Now, the schools that really wanted to do 9 games really want it more at that point because they want Texas and Oklahoma coming through their stadium because that's going to sell out their stadium. Fans will be super excited to buy tickets for those games. So they're pumped. You've still got schools like Mississippi State and Kentucky that don't want 9 games because they want to schedule to win 6. They want to schedule to be bowl eligible. They'll have good years. They know that. But in the bad years, they want to make sure they can still make a bowl game. And so they were against it. For the most part, the better programs in the SEC were for it. Nick Saban was for 9, but then when it looked like they were going to do 9 and Alabama's annual rivals were going to be Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU, he's like, can we not do LSU? And suddenly he was for 8 and staying at 8. But he's retired now. And then you have this playoff stuff. The SEC ADs, some of them even who wanted the 9-game schedule before, started to come back around to the 8-game schedule after what happened with the playoff selection last year. Now, Ari and I have been over this a million times. If Alabama doesn't lose to Oklahoma, if Ole Miss doesn't lose to Florida or Kentucky, I don't think you're even having that argument because either Indiana or SMU is not getting in and one of those teams was getting in. So that's a bit of an overreaction, and I think that's probably what Greg Sankey was telling those guys. But going into the SEC spring meetings in Destin this year, the prevailing thought was they wanted the same auto bid system that the Big Ten wanted because that would allow them to go to 9 games. And remember that what I said about selling those games to ESPN, that best game of the week package that CBS used to have on the most below market deal in the history of the world. Well, they sold it for $300 million a year. A couple years later, the Big Ten sells vastly inferior packages to CBS and NBC for about the same amount of money. And the SEC folks are like, crap, we left a lot of money on the table here. How do we now generate some more money? All of their rights are with Disney/ESPN, so they don't have a lot of leverage. But one thing they could do is say, hey, if we gave you more high quality games, would you give us more money? And ESPN's like, maybe, maybe not. And the SEC's like, okay, then we won't. And ESPN's like, oh, so you will give us more high quality games? And the SEC's like, for the right price. So they talked it through. The right price is coming. And all of a sudden, It's back on the table. Plus, you have the Big Ten saying, if you do this, if you go to 9, we might give you the format that you want. And remember, I said there were ADs going into the spring meetings in Destin that wanted the auto bids. They got talked out of the auto bids. The coaches and the management of the conference talked them out of the auto bids and said, no. Go all at large. There's a better chance of more SEC teams getting in that way. And so they said, okay, we'll go with that. But there was still resistance because you still had the schools that want to schedule for bowl eligibility. So this is where I think Greg Sankey, the commissioner, had to kind of ram this thing through. And they're on board now. They got it done. And now the ball is in the Big Ten's court because they have until the end of November to decide on a 2026 playoff format, or they'll keep the one they have. Personally, I don't mind if they push that past that deadline and just keep the one they have. I don't think they're going to do that now because I think they did this today to make sure they can get what they want by the end of November, and the playoff will be what they want it to be in 2026, which is 16 teams, 5 conference champions that are guaranteed to get in, 11 at-large spots. I think the Big Ten's kind of backed itself into a corner on this now because the SEC gave them what they wanted. And now if they don't do it, well, they're the ones in the way. So they've got to decide how they want to play this because they don't have a lot of things to complain about anymore. The SEC is playing 9 conference games. That argument doesn't work. So now either give the SEC what it wants or you come up with a new argument.